The longer a man stays single, the more he values his peace, guards his solitude, and raises his standards. He becomes emotionally self-reliant but cautious of vulnerability. Love shifts from a desire to a choice. Freedom becomes sacred, and any relationship must now enhance, not disrupt, the world he's built alone. When a man spends a long time without a relationship, something begins to shift within him. At first, he may miss the presence of someone, the comfort of intimacy, the warmth of a shared connection. But over time, as days turn into months or even years, he starts to discover something deeper, his peace. The quiet moments no longer feel empty. They begin to feel sacred. Without the distractions or emotional turbulence that sometimes accompany relationships, he becomes more aware of what disrupts his mental and emotional well-being. He becomes more selective about the energy he allows around him. He notices the difference between chaos and calm, between connection and control. Where he once may have tolerated emotional drama or misunderstandings for the sake of love, now he weighs the cost. His emotional peace becomes non-negotiable. In solitude, he learns to sit with his thoughts. He listens to himself in a way he may never have done before. He reflects more deeply. He becomes more aware of his boundaries and more committed to enforcing them. This doesn't mean he's closed off. It means he has tasted the kind of peace that doesn't come from others, and he's not willing to give it up for just anyone. The longer he's been alone, the more intentional he becomes with his time and energy. He doesn't jump at the first sign of interest. He no longer entertains connections that feel forced, one-sided, or draining. He knows that the wrong relationship can cost more than just time. It can cost clarity, self-esteem, and peace of mind. And now that he's spent time rebuilding all of that within himself, he guards it like treasure. He becomes more observant, not just of others, but of himself. He recognizes his own emotional triggers and learns how to manage them. He starts to value communication that's honest, clear, and respectful. He's less likely to respond out of impulse and more likely to respond with intention. The inner stillness he's cultivated becomes his compass, and he's careful not to let anyone pull him away from it. This shift can confuse others. Some may call it emotional detachment or avoidance, but it's not. It's maturity, it's growth, it's wisdom earned through solitude. He's not avoiding love. He's just not willing to pay for it with his peace. He understands now that peace is not the absence of love, but the foundation for it. In many ways, his solitude becomes his training ground, and by the time someone comes along, he's not just looking for chemistry, he's looking for alignment. He wants a connection that feels like peace, not pressure. He wants someone who adds to the quiet strength he's built, not someone who takes from it. Because once a man has found peace within himself, the cost of losing it is far too high. When a man has spent a long time without a relationship, solitude becomes more than just his environment. It becomes his way of life. What once may have felt like loneliness gradually transforms into a rhythm he understands, a space he navigates with ease. He no longer fills the silence with noise or distractions. Instead, he begins to lean into it. He wakes up and moves at his own pace, makes decisions without needing to consult or consider anyone else, and builds routines that serve only him. With time, the absence of emotional entanglements gives him clarity. He begins to realize how much energy is preserved when he isn't constantly managing someone else's moods, needs, or expectations. He finds peace in not having to explain himself, not having to compromise on every small thing, and not having to prioritize another person's preferences over his own. In this space, he becomes deeply in tune with who he is, what he enjoys, what triggers him, what motivates him, and what gives him peace. This habitual aloneness can be misunderstood. It may look like isolation, but often it's empowerment. He becomes emotionally self-sufficient. He doesn't look for someone to complete him because, over time, he learns how to complete himself. He knows how to enjoy his own company whether that's going to the gym, eating at his favorite restaurant, pursuing a passion, or simply lying on the couch lost in thought. There's no rush to fill the space with another person because he no longer sees solitude as something that needs fixing. Of course, this comfort in solitude doesn't mean he's without desire for companionship. It just means that companionship has to meet a new standard. It must enhance, not replace, the peace he's found. He's not interested in settling just to avoid being alone, because being alone no longer feels like a punishment. It feels like protection. And so, any relationship has to be meaningful enough to invite someone into that sacred space. However, this deep comfort with solitude can also make re-entry into emotional vulnerability more difficult. He's learned how to do everything for himself, and the thought of adjusting that for someone else can feel foreign, even risky. He might hesitate to let someone in, not because he's closed off, but because he's spent so long building something stable within himself. There's an internal hesitation. What if letting someone in unravels the calm I've worked so hard to build? Solitude, in time, becomes like a quiet room he has mastered. He knows where everything is. He knows how to move through it. It feels safe. It feels controlled. And while he may one day want to open the door and invite someone in, he won't do it carelessly. Because now, the silence doesn't scare him. It grounds him. He's no longer afraid of being alone. He's afraid of losing the version of himself that solitude helped him discover. When a man spends a significant amount of time outside of a relationship, he gains something that often goes unnoticed: perspective. Without the distractions and emotional demands of a partner, he finally has room to reflect, to think clearly about what he truly values in a relationship. He's no longer operating out of impulse or need. Instead, his choices become deliberate. With this clarity, his standards begin to evolve. Time alone gives him the opportunity to look back at past relationships with a critical but honest lens. He sees the patterns, what worked, what didn't, and what he accepted out of fear, insecurity, or convenience. He begins to understand the importance of emotional maturity, not just chemistry. He realizes that peace, compatibility, communication, and shared values matter more than looks or surface-level attraction. And once he becomes aware of these deeper needs, he can't unsee them. He also begins to raise the bar for himself. Being alone means he has more time to grow, to explore his interests, work on his mindset, health, and goals. This self-improvement naturally shifts his expectations of a partner. If he's been building discipline, emotional intelligence, and purpose, he's not going to be satisfied with someone who lacks vision or consistency. He no longer sees a relationship as a status symbol or a cure for loneliness. It becomes a partnership, something sacred that should reflect the life he's creating. As his internal standards rise, so do his external ones. He becomes less impressed by superficial things. Beauty alone doesn't distract him the way it used to. He's looking for depth now, for someone who brings something real to the table, someone who is aligned with where he's going, not just where he's been. He listens more closely to the way someone communicates, how they handle stress, how they treat others, how they show up when it matters. These things start to mean more to him than any physical feature or fleeting emotional high. Because he's spent time with himself, he knows what harmony feels like. And with that awareness, he becomes less tolerant of emotional chaos, games, or inconsistency. What might have once seemed exciting, emotional roller coasters or unpredictable connections, now feels like a threat to his balance. He's no longer willing to shrink himself to make something work. He'd rather wait than settle. He becomes patient, not passive, but intentional. The urgency that once came from societal pressure, friends and relationships, or even family expectations begins to fade. He stops chasing timelines and starts honoring alignment. When someone new enters his life, he's not just asking, "Do I like them?" He's also asking, "Do they fit into the life I've built and the man I've become?" Raising his standards isn't about becoming picky or difficult. It's about recognizing his worth. He's done the inner work, and he knows what he brings to the table. So, Now, he waits for someone who not only matches his energy, but respects the peace, growth, and strength he's worked so hard to cultivate. Spending a long time outside of a relationship teaches a man how to rely on himself emotionally. In the beginning, he may feel the absence of affection, support, or even the simple reassurance that someone is emotionally invested in him. But as time passes, he begins to realize that the very things he once expected from a partner can be nurtured from within. He starts taking responsibility for his emotional state, learning how to soothe, encourage, and uplift himself without waiting for someone else to do it for him. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It often comes after moments of silence, reflection, and even emotional discomfort. Without anyone to lean on, he is forced to confront his feelings head-on. He no longer has the option of escaping into the comfort of another person. Instead, he begins to process his emotions fully, without distractions. Over time, he develops coping strategies that are both healthy and empowering. He may begin journaling, meditating, engaging in creative work, or simply learning how to sit with discomfort without trying to escape it. What starts off as loneliness gradually becomes a space of personal growth. He begins to recognize his emotional triggers, understand his patterns, and work through unresolved wounds that he may have carried from childhood or past relationships. This emotional awareness strengthens him. He becomes more grounded. His reactions slow down, his communication becomes clearer, and his confidence is no longer dependent on external validation. When he becomes emotionally self-sufficient, he doesn't look for someone to fill a void, because the void no longer exists. He's already whole. He's already enough. Any relationship that comes into his life is now a complement, not a crutch. He doesn't seek someone to rescue him, fix him, or complete him. He seeks a partner who can walk beside him, someone secure, balanced, and emotionally mature. This kind of self-sufficiency can sometimes be misread as emotional unavailability. But there's a difference. He's not closed off. He's simply not needy. He doesn't cling to affection or depend on constant reassurance. He gives love freely, but from a place of stability, not desperation. And because he's learned how to comfort himself, he's far more capable of offering that same emotional presence to someone else. He also becomes more discerning. He knows the energy it takes to stay emotionally balanced, and he's not willing to invest in relationships that drain rather than nourish him. He guards his peace. He honors his boundaries, and he expects emotional maturity in return. The beauty of emotional self-sufficiency is that it brings freedom. He's no longer bound by the fear of being alone. He can walk away from situations that don't serve him because he knows he'll be okay. He trusts himself, his ability to handle life, make decisions, and face challenges with resilience. In a world that often teaches men to suppress their emotions, his strength lies in the fact that he's learned to embrace them, own them, and navigate them without needing anyone else to carry the weight for him. When a man has been without a relationship for a long time, opening up again doesn't come easily. Over time, he learns to protect himself. He builds walls, not out of bitterness, but out of habit and self-preservation. Vulnerability, once something he may have offered freely, now feels like a risk that must be carefully measured. The longer he spends alone, the more distant emotional intimacy becomes, and the idea of letting someone back into his heart feels unfamiliar, even dangerous. He spent so much time relying on himself, handling his emotions alone, and finding peace in solitude that the thought of disrupting that balance feels uncomfortable. He fears the loss of control. In solitude, he gets to decide what he feels, when he feels it, and how deeply he processes it. But in a relationship, emotions become shared. He would have to open a window into his inner world, something he hasn't done in a long time. He may meet someone who shows genuine care and interest, but even then, his instinct is to hold back. Not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't know if it's safe. Trust takes time, and for a man who has spent years on his own, time becomes the most valuable currency. He needs to see consistency. He needs to feel emotionally safe. He needs to believe that if he hands over parts of himself, they won't be mishandled or used against him. His struggle isn't just about trust in another person. It's about trusting himself again in an emotional context. After being out of the emotional rhythm of a relationship, he questions whether he still knows how to communicate his feelings, how to be vulnerable, or how to lean on someone else. Emotional connection can feel like a muscle that has atrophied, and using it again can feel awkward, even painful. He's afraid of making the same mistakes, of giving too much, or of letting someone in who might not understand the man he's become in his solitude. Even small gestures of openness can feel monumental. Sharing thoughts, expressing needs, or being emotionally present might feel like exposing himself in a way that he's no longer used to. He might appear guarded, distant, or emotionally unavailable. But underneath that is often a quiet battle between desire and fear, the desire to connect and the fear of losing the emotional balance he's worked so hard to maintain. In some cases, he might retreat when things begin to feel serious, not because he doesn't want love, but because love asks him to soften, to surrender a part of himself. And for a man who has learned to stand so firmly on his own, that softening feels like a threat to the identity he's built. The struggle to open up again is not a reflection of weakness or apathy. It's a reflection of the deep emotional rewiring that takes place when someone spends years learning how to thrive alone. The longer a man remains outside the dating scene, the more he begins to view modern dating with a skeptical eye. What once seemed natural or exciting now feels complicated, performative, or even disingenuous. He starts to notice how much of dating today is driven by surface-level attraction, short-term gratification, and unspoken games. And because he's spent so much time away from it, he sees everything with fresh eyes, eyes that are no longer clouded by desperation or romantic idealism. He becomes aware of the performative nature of it all, the curated profiles, the casual swiping, the emphasis on instant chemistry rather than emotional compatibility. He sees how social media and dating apps have altered expectations and interactions. Connections often feel transactional, and genuine intentions are harder to find. He questions whether people are looking for love, validation, entertainment, or just an escape from their own solitude. Having spent time alone, he values honesty and depth, but the dating culture often rewards charm over character and appearance over substance. He becomes wary of how easy it is to misrepresent oneself, how quickly people say the right things but do the opposite. He's no longer interested in chasing affection or convincing someone of his worth. Instead, he wants clarity and mutual respect from the beginning. But that desire often clashes with a dating environment built on ambiguity and unspoken expectations. He also notices the subtle power struggles that often define modern relationships. Who texts first? Who shows more interest? Who holds emotional leverage? These games feel unnecessary to him now. He's not looking to win or outplay anyone. He wants connection, not competition. But it's difficult to find people who are on the same page, people who are willing to show up authentically without fear of being too much or too available. His skepticism is not bitterness, it's discernment. After being away from the emotional noise for so long, his standards have shifted. He wants connection that feels real, not rehearsed. He listens more carefully to what's not being said. He observes patterns, not just promises. And when he sees inconsistencies, red flags, or emotional immaturity, he doesn't ignore them. He steps back, not because he's afraid of love, but because he respects it too much to waste it. Over time, he may even begin to question whether the kind of relationship he's seeking still exists. He wonders if emotional depth, loyalty, mutual growth, and peace are still priorities for others, or if those values have been replaced by convenience and aesthetics. The longer he stays out of the dating world, the more detached he becomes from its norms, and the more reluctant he feels to step back into it. So when he does choose to engage, he does so with caution. He's not jaded, but he's no longer naive. He wants something rare, something grounded in truth, not trends. And until he finds that, he'd rather stay on his own path than lose himself trying to adapt to a system that no longer feels aligned with who he is. Time spent away from romantic relationships gives a man the space to reevaluate what love truly means to him. Without the influence of someone else's emotions, expectations, or behavior shaping his view, he begins to ask himself deeper questions. What is love, beyond the excitement and attraction? What is love, if it's not just companionship or comfort? What kind of love aligns with the life he's building and the man he's becoming? As the distractions of dating fade, he starts looking inward. He reflects on past relationships, what worked, what hurt, what felt real, and what was built on illusion. He notices the difference between needing someone and choosing someone. Love, once romanticized as fireworks and passion, now starts to look more like peace, presence, and compatibility. He learns to distinguish between emotional intensity and emotional safety. He begins to value the kind of love that isn't always loud but is steady and consistent. With solitude, love takes on a more intentional meaning. He no longer views it as something to chase or capture. Instead, it becomes something to grow into, a space where he can show up as his full self without fear of being misunderstood or dismissed. He recognizes that love is not about filling a void, but about sharing a life that is already full. This changes how he approaches relationships. He's no longer impressed by charm alone. He's looking for alignment, emotional maturity, and shared values. He also becomes more aware of the kind of love he wants to give. He reflects on the ways he may have been closed off, reactive, or emotionally unavailable in the past. Through self-awareness, he begins to take accountability for his own emotional patterns. This growth helps him understand that love isn't just about what he receives, it's about what he offers. And he wants to offer something grounded, respectful, and deeply intentional. Love begins to look like a quiet knowing rather than a dramatic high. It's found in small gestures, honest conversations, and mutual effort. He stops glorifying toxic dynamics or mistaking chaos for passion. The longer he's alone, the more clearly he sees how love should feel. Safe, expansive, rooted in trust and freedom. He also reevaluates what love requires. He sees that love alone isn't enough without communication, understanding, and shared purpose. He's no longer interested in temporary connections or situationships. He wants something lasting, not because he's afraid of being alone, but because he knows the strength of standing on his own. And the only thing he'll make room for now is a love that enhances that strength, not threatens it. In this new understanding, love becomes sacred. Not rare because it's impossible, but rare because it now has to meet a higher standard. He's not looking for perfection, he's looking for presence. And after all the time he's spent getting to know himself, he realizes that love, at its best, is simply the space where two whole people choose each other, freely, fully, and without fear. After spending a long time without a relationship, a man often begins to deeply value his independence, not just as a lifestyle, but as a core part of who he is. He becomes used to making his own decisions, managing his time without compromise, and pursuing his personal goals without distraction. This autonomy creates a sense of freedom that feels both empowering and stabilizing. But as this independence becomes more ingrained, so does a subtle growing fear, the fear of losing it. At first, he may not even recognize it as fear. It can show up as resistance to commitment, hesitation in emotional intimacy, or avoidance of situations that might demand change. He may tell himself that he's just being careful, that he's waiting for the right person, or that he's prioritizing his growth. But underneath those reasons is often a deep concern that allowing someone into his life might mean sacrificing the peace, control, and structure he's worked hard to build. He knows what it feels like to have space, to think clearly, to act freely, to focus entirely on himself. He's created a world where his needs come first, not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. There's comfort in not having to compromise, not having to negotiate daily decisions, or constantly consider another person's preferences. It becomes second nature to live life on his own terms. And the idea of changing that, of adjusting, bending, or accommodating, feels like a threat to the freedom he cherishes. Even the prospect of love, something he might secretly desire, becomes complicated. Because love often asks for shared space, emotional investment, and some level of dependency. It requires openness, vulnerability, and a willingness to merge parts of your life with another's. And for someone who's grown used to complete autonomy, that merging can feel like losing himself. He wonders, will I still have time for my passions? Will I still have space to think? Will I be expected to give up parts of my life to make room for someone else? These questions can cause him to hesitate or withdraw when relationships begin to deepen. He might fear that a partner will disrupt his routine, dilute his focus, or take away the solitude he's come to rely on. Even if he meets someone who aligns with his values, the fear doesn't immediately go away. It's not about whether the other person is worth it. It's about whether he's ready to share his world without losing it. This fear isn't a sign that he doesn't want love or connection. It's a sign that his independence has become part of his identity. Letting someone in now means redefining what togetherness looks like, finding a relationship dynamic where freedom and commitment can coexist. He wants a partnership where he can be himself fully, where independence isn't sacrificed but respected. Because after spending so long standing alone, the only connection he's willing to embrace is one that allows him to continue standing tall, together but never diminished. In the end, when a man has been without a relationship for a long time, it doesn't mean he's broken, bitter, or incapable of love. It means he's evolved. He has learned to protect his peace, become comfortable in his own company, and raise the bar for what he allows into his life. He's emotionally self-sufficient, more discerning, and no longer easily swayed by shallow connection or temporary attraction. Yet with all this growth comes complexity, the struggle to open up, the skepticism toward modern dating, the redefinition of love, and the fear of losing the independence he fought so hard to build. But perhaps that's the point. Time alone doesn't make him less capable of love. It makes him more intentional with it. He no longer seeks to be completed by someone else. He seeks someone who complements the life he's already created. And when he finally chooses to let someone in, it won't be from a place of need, but from strength. Because the man who has learned to live fully on his own is the same man who, when he loves, will do so with depth, clarity, and purpose.